thank you for this day that you give us. And Lord, for the opportunity to come together and take care of this business that we've got before us tonight. We pray, Lord, that you would grant us the wisdom and the knowledge that we need to make the decisions that we're faced with. And Lord, we understand that there's always going to be times that we're faced with decisions that always are not going to be popular. But we have to do what we feel is in the best interest of the people that we represent, and that's our school children and their families. Lord, we thank you for this Christmas season that we're about to undertake, and we just ask you that to always remind us that what the season is really all about. And it's about your Son and the sacrifice that he made for us, that we all might have everlasting life. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Just a minute. It's now 5 o'clock. We'll call this meeting of the Wilson County Board of Education in session. And at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. McNeese if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, I'd like to ask that if I entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Weathers, second by Ms. Armstead, that we adopt the agenda. Any discussion? If not being any discussion, we vote to adopt the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let it show that it passed unanimously. Recommendation from the Director of Schools.
Yes, Mr. Chair, for you, asking that you approve the recommendation to award bid number 2016-03 on school buses to the Mid-South Bus Center. And with that, I've also asked Mr. Partlow to be present here to answer questions and discuss as far as not only the process, but why we're recommending this bid. Ms. Partlow.
Yes, ma'am, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to point out an error that I made down on under 78 passengers. I wrote out the word 4, it actually should have been, sorry about that. Actually should have been 5, but the math is correct at $475,000. This bid, I'm sure I guess y'all have some questions concerning. We had 3 bidders, 2 of which decided to submit a no bid. I do not fully understand why they did not do that. But I've picked up a bid from another school district that one of the bidders had turned in, and it's still $1,000 less than what they had bid, or our winning bid had been on the 90 passenger buses. So I feel like it's still very much in line.
Do you have a copy of the bid specs, Mr. Partlow?
Yes, sir, I'm sure I do.
Do we have a copy of that?
I can get you a copy. Would you like it now?
No, let's wait till next Tuesday to do it. Yes, please. Don't scratch that. Yeah, that would be, pretty soon would be good.
Pretty soon?
Well, yeah, I'd like to have them
Okay.
tonight. Before I can vote, I need to see them. I'll say that.
Okay.
And Ms. Partlow, if you haven't, I can get Ms. Perry to run some copies if
Okay.
needed.
Because we've been up against this before, Mr. Partlow. While you were in absence of our district, where certain companies couldn't bid on our buses because of the way the bus spec was drawn up. And there again, we're going to one bidder.
Well,
I like that myself.
I had, well, we're going to the one bidder that bid. They all can take exceptions to anything, even the bid that was awarded, there were exceptions written out to it. I had one of the vendors that did not bid to call me, and her only concern was about fuel tanks. She said, we had requested 100-gallon fuel tanks, and we had, she said, the largest tank that they offer is a 60-gallon. And I told her it was Cumberland International. I said, all you gotta do is put an exception in there, and we'll take that into account. I mean, if I can get a 100-gallon tank at the same price and I'm getting a 60,000 or a 60-gallon, then I'm gonna take probably a 100-gallon tank.
And Mr. Weathers may be able to help me on here, but I think it even went to the size of the windows or a couple of details like that. Don, do you remember those exceptions from the other time we got into this?
One of the things I remember was a 67-inch interior height versus a 68-inch interior height. There was a lot of other things that I remember from the last situation that we dealt with, Mr. Partlow. But the problem, I don't know if this is appropriate, we don't have a motion in a second, but my problem, Mr. Partlow, is if we get it down to where only one bus company can actually bid, then we're doing a disservice to the county, to the taxpayers of Wilson County, because we're gonna pay too much for buses. We may not this time, but at some point in time, if our specification is so narrow that only one bus company can win, or the other bus companies aren't willing to even submit a bid, then something's wrong with our process. And the only people that's gonna lose on that is our taxpayers, because they're gonna pay too much. And I think, I would love to find out why these people no bid. I mean, I think we owe it to the people of this county to say, here's why I didn't bid on this project. Because otherwise, you know, we're hurting ourselves in our overall system, I think. So my request to the board would be not to do anything on this tonight, because we're not going to get any progress between now and January 4th as far as getting orders processed, because bus companies shut down during the holidays. Or if they're anything like an automotive company, they're not going to process any orders between now and January 4th. But I'd love to have a work session.
Well, they would, my understanding from Central is if we can get if they know we're gonna commitment to buy buses, then they will go ahead and place the orders and we can have them before school starts next year. You know, as a taxpayer myself, I do want to purchase items as cheaply as possible. The thing about specifications, when I used to work with First Student, we did the same thing. We would take exceptions to what school districts had put out in specifications. And on the ceiling height, I think the standard Bluebird is like 71 inches or 72 inches. And I think we had put 72 in it. I mean, we would go with their standard bus as long as it meets Tennessee state specifications. And the same thing with window sizes. I mean, those are prescribed by the state, and that the manufacturer has to do it. I mean, I guess we could simplify it to the point to say, as long as it just meets state specifications, then it's okay.
Well, I think we have to evaluate the process, Mr. Partlow, to get more people involved in the bidding. You know, I think it behooves all of us, because we may get a better bus for a lower price. And I think all of us, including you, are interested in not spending a single dollar more for a bus than we absolutely have to get the quality that we need to hold up over the duration of the life of the bus.
Well, I think one of the obvious questions, it was one that I guess maybe common sense would have dictated, but it was the distinction of why the preference over 100-gallon over the 60-gallon. And, you know, the response back was as far as what you were going to be generating up on fill-ups in miles per gallon.
Right, well, they do have to stop us off, obviously, if we have a 100,000-gallon tank, and a 100-gallon tank. And that's, I mean, that's been pretty well standard as long as I've been around.
But that was something that was, I guess, a question as far as not having that as standard with one of them. And then I think the second question that came up as far as there was, gosh, it's been a little bit since I've looked at it, but is it international? As far as that there was an issue there?
Cumberland International, yes.
You know, as far as what they could deliver and didn't jump forward.
Well, how do you want me to proceed?
Well, I want to say this, there's one particular company that seems like every time we advertise for buses, they're not happy about something. They try to find a way to make it look like there's some type of skullduggery going on. You know, the law plainly states that you can't spec anybody out of a vehicle or a tractor or whatever it might be if you're putting it out for a government bid.
Right.
You know, the law says you can't do that. We're not breaking the law, but I don't understand why that this one particular company always finds something wrong.
Yes, sir.
You know, if they really wanted our business, they'd come to the table, in my opinion. And I don't want to spend any more money than we have to spend. But I get tired of people giving us the runaround all the time, saying like we're doing something wrong.
Right.
If we're doing something wrong, tell us about it. Bring it up here.
Right, something specific.
Yeah, you know, just because you think you're not gonna get a bid, you know, and I think that,
Well, that
we might need to go, if we're gonna do anything any different, we might need to go to the head of the street and find out, talk to the people that actually make these buses and not go through some sales rep. And find out if they've got a problem, if there are something we're doing that's keeping them from being able to do.
And that's the very logic that I came up with, is to have a work session before our next board meeting to find out those very answers. And then if at the end of that, we decide, hey, we're good with what we got, then we can approve these bids and go forward with Mid-South. But if not, then maybe we want to rebid it after we understand why those people have a problem with the way our bids are. But I think,
Is there gonna be a problem with us not being able to get the buses that we need if we don't take some action tonight? Have we got any kind of wind in there at all?
No, actually, the 22nd, I think, is the last day that he said that he could guarantee delivery before school starts.
And the delivery would be July?
Well, right, the last part of July,
we're not short on buses right now, are we?
22nd of what, Carla?
December.
We're
Tomorrow?
not, I'm sorry. We're not short on buses right now, are
No, sir, we're in good shape on buses.
we? Okay.
When do we determine that we need to buy some new buses?
Basically, we start looking at the condition of the fleet and our plans to expand the fleet. We desperately need a couple of tools that we don't have right now. We need additional buses and we need additional bus drivers. Some of our buses are not a large quantity, but several of the buses are extremely overcrowded. Routes are getting close to an hour and a half or over, and we're just having a real tough time, and parents are getting pretty upset with us about not getting kids home quicker.
Is that a school bus problem or a school bus driver problem, or both?
It's a little bit of both.
Well, I don't like having these come up, and we've got to vote on it tonight, spending over $1 million with a single bid, and we got to do it tonight. We don't have any time to discuss it, have a workshop or anything else.
Okay.
And I'm not, you're just up at the microphone type of thing right now.
Right.
And you know, so.
Let me say something on this, if I may. Would that be okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I was kind of surprised that this got put in a special board meeting agenda type situation. I would have thought we'd have taken, if it was such a sense of urgency, we would have taken care of it, at the beginning of the month. That kind of caught me off guard when that was put in there. And from a standpoint too of, and this, I'm repeating what somebody else has already said, when we're talking about, and this is, wasn't in one of our conversations, Mr. Barlow, so but in my concern about some of these longer routes, and like I say, I'm just repeating what's been mentioned, when I asked those questions about some of that and the answer I got was that the problem is we don't have enough, buses are not a problem, it's bus drivers. And I know we're trying to keep in a rotation, I know that. We don't want to wind up with all having to buy a massive number of buses one year, and I understand that's good practice in order to keep our budget kind of consistent and this, that, and the other year in, year out. But all of a sudden, the sense of urgency of having to do this, we might all be better educated on this if maybe these three bidders were offered the opportunity to sit down in a work session and maybe educate us, or we could ask them the question, so we would know exactly what we're talking about. The rest of the board may have all this expertise on all the precise things about a school bus and what we're asking in a bid, but I'm not. And so it may be my fault, I don't know. But like I say, I didn't know ahead of time that we were going to be bidding these buses at this point. And so, if we've got enough buses right now to sustain what we're doing, I don't see this, why we couldn't invite these people, and if they don't want to accept an invitation to come to that work session and give us an overview of why they're not bidding on our buses, then that's their problem. Because if they've got an issue, then they can help us. We can get the answers we need, but I don't see the urgency from July to August, and I know when school starts and when it does, and I understand all that. But if we're okay on buses, and as long as we get that fixed by the 1st of August, it looks like that as long as everybody would feel good about what we're doing and making the proper decision in the best interest of our school system, our taxpayers, and all this, that, and the other, then I think that maybe that we should invite them at 4 o'clock on the 4th or whatever the date is, and do that if that's not a big problem. It's a major issue. It's, maybe somehow we already know that we need to do ahead of time a year following when we're replacing, but I just think that it would be in the best interest of this if we did that.
I wonder too, what would happen if we didn't have a special call board meeting, we wouldn't even be voting on this tonight. So, I don't see the urgency either. I know we gotta have buses like Mr. Robinson said, but I don't like to be.
The question was asked about how often we bought buses. Aren't we on a schedule? They rotate off every so many years, we buy so many?
Yes. County Commission about 15 years ago put $1.2 million in their budget to buy buses every year. So they would not have to issue debt.
Every year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the deal with where that the state or the federal government, or maybe both, pass some laws where the buses can be used longer now, is that helping us in? We still got some in our fleet that would have rolled off, but now we're still been able to.
We do have a few, yes, but some of them are literally worn out. In fact, just last week, the state came in for an extended utilization inspection. So we're trying to use them, but some of them are just worn out.
Well, I guess we could take this $1 million that we were gonna spend on buses and maybe hire some more drivers.
That suits me.
Solve a lot of your problems.
That would solve it. I'd have less gray hair.
But still find bus drivers too.
It won't turn back.
That's right.
If they don't turn loose, you're okay.
That's right.
I had that problem a long time ago.
Anybody wanna make a motion?
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we defer this action till the January 4th board meeting and have a work session and invite all three of the companies that were on the original bid list to be there. And then we can question at will, and then make our decision at the January 4th board meeting.
And have a copy of the spec in front of us, and I second that motion.
You got a motion and a second. Any discussion? My part of the discussion would be to invite the people from the headquarters. Just don't go through no sales rep. Let's get the people in here that's got the knowledge about the buses and about the specs, that somebody can sit down and tell us why that they're not bidding. Okay?
Yes, sir.
That's all I ask of you. All right?
What time?
Let's have it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Can we give each company 30 minutes?
That
We'll
give,
have-
we have, what our meeting will be at 6 o'clock. That should be plenty of time, 2 hours.
Yeah.
Should be plenty of time.
Let's set up a rotation, 30
Yes,
minutes,
we have
please.
some of
I
those.
mean, just, right, and I don't mind, I'll try to facilitate that. One concern I would have would be if we rebid, does that put the winning bid at a disadvantage? since they're
I
already
think
built?
it, in order to be fair, that what we have here tonight be thrown out and everybody come back with a new bid. That's the only fair way, because these folks see what this company here has already bid. That's not fair to them.
Right.
Okay?
My question then between now and how we get that information as far as that we are going to get rid of this bid and start the process anew. Mr. Jennings, is there anything procedurally that we need to be aware of?
I think the first thing we need to do is we need to reject this bid that's come in tonight and start over again with Don's motion. Is that correct?
If you wish to reject the bid, yes.
I don't think it's fair, Mike, tonight, to have this bid laying out here on the table and then somebody else come in and know what the bid already is.
Well, and it's not fair, Larry, but in all honesty, they can make a public records request and get it. So, and they know, not just bus bids, but in other areas, they know how to find out that information.
What's your recommendation?
Well, if you want to reject the bid, that's up to y'all, but what I don't want you to do is have a work session where they come in and say, well, if I'd known this, I'd have bid less, and they start trying to have an open bid in here on the floor. You can't do that.
No.
You either got to accept that bid or reject it and rebid it, one of the two.
That'd be part of your motion to reject the bid.
How far late, if we reject this bid, how far along is that gonna put us?
How long?
How far back is that gonna throw us timeline wise?
6 to 8 weeks, I guess. Depends on, well, once they start building buses, the sooner you get it in, the sooner you're gonna get the buses back. It could delay it 2 to 3 months.
Will they be 16
Yes, sir.
buses instead of 15 chances?
Most likely.
What the wishes of the board? You wanna reject this bid or you wanna leave it on the table?
Reject it.
Well, you've got a motion and a second on the floor right now,
Yep.
and I guess if you're going to reject it, you probably need to do that in a separate bid, a separate motion.
All in favor of having a work session on January the 7th, 4th?
It's the fourth.
January 4th at 6 o'clock. Vote aye? 4 o'clock, yeah. Okay. Everybody voted? Vote aye? Okay, let's show we have a work session on January the 4th at 4 p.m. for the purpose of discussing bus bids. All right, now we need to entertain a motion either to accept this bid or reject this bid.
Make it, so move. To reject that bid.
Mr. McNeese makes a motion to reject the bid. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weathers. Any discussion?
So in the work session, are we still going to have the representatives or information? We want, as you, Mr. Jennings has pointed out, we can't have the bidding war here during a work session, or the information about that. So wouldn't it be just as easy for you to get a report and maybe ask questions and then just bring a report back? Or how it's, is the work session, does it need to be concerning that?
I think what I hear, reading between the comments is we want to find out why more than one bidder's not
Right.
bidding.
Right.
And that's the question you've got into work session.
Mm-hmm.
And that hopefully they'll give you some insight into that. I don't know what the time limit is on accepting the bid. If it's got to be done tonight, then you either got to accept it or reject it. If they can hold it open, I don't know if you want to do that or not.
Ms. Robin?
Couldn't we make that decision after we heard the work session? Couldn't we make that decision at the board meeting? If we wanted to reissue bids, we could make that at the board meeting? Can we do that?
Yeah, rather than reject it? right
Rather
now?
than reject it, because if they can't come in there and justify whatever,
Then we're
or
slowing the
justify
process.
the reason for not even offering a bid,
I just want to give this other company an opportunity to rebid if they wanted to. Only my sole purpose of rejecting the bid.
well, we could do that at the board meeting if we voted on this bid, and then we could make another motion to resubmit the
Original bid?
the bidding process. I mean, we could listen to the discussion and then make the decision whether to accept the bid or not. And then if we rejected it, we could then make the propose that we rebid the bus bid, depending on, we could do that, I think.
I think that might be a better choice, Mr. McNeese, because if we were to have a meeting with those other two companies and they decided they just didn't want to submit a bid, then we would at least have one valid, active bid that we could move forward with at that point if we chose to. Otherwise, we'd have to start all over again and delay the process. So I think that might be a better alternative.
I withdraw my motion. I mean, I was just trying to do it fair for everyone.
I withdraw my second.
Motion been withdrawn. All right, we will have a work session on the 4th, all right, 4 o'clock. Okay, next item of business.
So we're postponing this.
Yes, yes, ma'am. All right.
Thank you, B.E.
Well,
Legal matter.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett.
Can you, Mr. Barlow, and Ms. Judy?
All right. Next item is the legal matters. Mr. Jennings?
Yes, sir. The first item of business is the requested appeal of Matthew Mock from the decision of the hearing officer. And as Mr. Clemens and I understand the process, I think he gets to speak, and then I'll speak, and then he gets to close if he would like. Is that fair, Mike? All right, so there is a court reporter here. Not that y'all would ever do this, but sometimes it appears maybe that 2 or 3 of you talk at the same time. So to make it easier for Ms. Teresa, you might not want to do that. I know that would never happen here, but just in case.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here on behalf of Mr. Mock to discuss the appeal. I wanted to first make clear that there's only one issue that we asked to appeal from that hearing, and that was the hearing officer's recommendation that Mr. Mock be suspended without pay for a semester. With the exception of that recommendation, I believe the hearing officer did an excellent job of listening to and reviewing all the evidence in the case. I hope that you guys have had time to look over and review the evidence and the transcripts. I know there was a lot to it, but if you have had time to review those things, I think that you'll agree that the facts that were uncovered during that hearing are very different from the ones that were presented to you on July 6th, I believe it was, when the vote was taken for Mr. Mock to be terminated. And this is Matthew Mock right here. He's a teacher at Tucker's Crossroads for 14 years, taught 6th grade math. He and his wife have 2 daughters, one of which is starting college in the fall. There was testimony at the hearing that Anna Raines testified that her own child loves Mr. Mock. Other teachers at the school testified that he has a great rapport with the kids, with other teachers. On top of that, actually, the hearing officer listed in his order on page 11 that there was no prior record of poor or inadequate teaching or behavior on Mr. Mock's part. There was no prior record of a singular or specific bad or adverse act attributable to Mr. Mock. That Mr. Mock had any direct involvement in any Facebook entries in and around the Tucker's Crossroads community, and there was no evidence of prior reprimands from his principals at Tucker's Crossroads during his 14 years there. There was also testimony at that hearing Mr. Mock had for years voluntarily mowed the baseball field, Tucker's Crossroads, he tutored children, and that when a former Tucker's Crossroads student had passed away, that he personally paid to have that child's name stenciled on the basketball court floor at Tucker's, which is still there today. As was stated in the hearing officer's order, and as you'll know, the Tennessee legislature enacted the Teacher Tenure Act, the primary purpose of which is to protect school teachers from arbitrary demotions and dismissals. And the arbitrary portion of that is what I want you to really focus on tonight, if you will, when making your decision on what punishment suits the crime that was actually committed in this case. If you'll recall, if you reviewed the transcripts at that time, which was May 28th, 2015, this is when all this occurred, Susie Breedwell was the principal at Tucker's. Prior to that, she'd been the principal at Tucker's for 7 years. I believe she'd been the assistant principal at Wilson Central for 7 years prior to that. And she testified that there was a tradition of pranks at both Tucker's and Wilson Central High School. Mr. Mock himself testified that his first year at Tucker's, for instance, he walked into school one day to find that all the desks from his classroom, which was in a portable at that time, were outside on a ramp in the yard. Mary Ann Sparks testified at the hearing that someone the year before the May 28th of last year, so the 2013-2014 school year, that another teacher had packing peanuts poured into her car. And all of the teachers who testified at the hearing, including Anna Raines, Melanie Mundy, Susie Breedwell, all of them acknowledged that they knew about or had heard about a tradition of pranks at Tucker's, and that as far as they knew, no one had ever been disciplined at all in regards to any of these pranks, much less immediate termination being the punishment for that. Ms. Breedwell testified that she did not recall a single incident during her entire career with Wilson County school system that prank's never been a disciplinary problem. She also testified that Mr. Mock had never been insubordinate to her, never neglected his duties under her. And just to back up and review a little bit, if you'll recall, that May 28th of last year was the last full day of school, but it was a stockpile day. There were no kids present at the school. And teachers had an end-of-year checklist, which they were finishing up. And at lunch that day, most of the teachers went to Demas's for a retirement lunch for Susie Breedwell. And when they returned back to the school from this lunch is when most of the pranks took place that were part of the charges that were presented to the board on July 6th. At some point that day, towards the end of the day, according to the testimony, Ms. Breedwell came over the intercom and said, people who were putting lotion on doorknobs or moving cars, whatever, it needs to stop. Mr. Mock at that point went around to every doorknob in the school, whether he had put lotion on or not, cleaned them off. Ms. Breedwell also testified that Mr. Mock actually had all his work done for his end-of-year checklist, with the exception of a Google assignment, which I can get into more later if I need to. But he had completed everything before lunch, so he got to work at like 6:30 that morning, as was normal for him to arrive at that time. She testified that no teacher had ever, that day or before or after, stated that Mr. Mock had created a hostile work environment, or that they felt bullied by him, or they felt targeted by him, or harassed by him, or anything of that nature. And she, under policy 5.500 of the board, which was one of the charges in the that was presented to you on July 6th, Susie Breedwell would have been the complaint manager had someone at the school had such a complaint against Mr. Mock. But again, she said she'd never heard any such allegation against him. Ms. Breedwell described that when she went to, I want to say like the alleged victim's room. I don't want to even bring her name out any more than it's been brought out, because I don't know, I just don't want to. You know who I'm talking about if you've read the transcript. She went to the alleged victim's room on that day. There was a few chairs moved around. She and the alleged victim discussed it, and Melanie Mundy, who was there with them, testified that she just left them to deal with it and walked out of the school. What Susie Bridwell did not know was that when Melanie Mundy walked out of the school, she then texted Anna Raines, who was the vice principal at Lebanon High School at the time. She's now the principal of Tucker's. And she testified that she sent her, Anna Raines testified that she received 2 texts, one of which said something like, this place is something else, and the other one said something like, if you don't hurry up and get here, this place is gonna explode. That's all that was said at the hearing about what those texts said. But from that, apparently, Anna Raines contacted several people at the central office. I think she had eventually got in touch with Mr. Hall, who then he or Anna Raines contacted Stephen Spencer, and they contacted the sheriff's deputy who went out to Tucker's with her and Stephen Spencer. When they went inside, Stephen Spencer testified that what they found was one classroom with 6 desks moved. And that was the extent of it. So June 12th was Ms. Breedwell's last official day as the principal at Tucker's Crossroad. But as of June 12th, no one had ever contacted Susie Breedwell to discuss the events that day. Ms. Breedwell testified that she attended a principal's meeting at Lebanon High School on June 1st. And it was actually at that same meeting that Marianne Sparks testified that Anna Raines approached her and said she was concerned about something she knew was going on at Tucker's Crossroads, and that it didn't really catch, Marianne Sparks said it didn't really catch her attention until she said something about a minority teacher there being targeted. They then, I think, testified they pulled Dr. Wright aside to tell her what had been said, and Anna Raines, for some reason, was then instructed to go get statements from people. And again, Susie Breedwell was at this meeting, but no one ever said a word to her at that meeting or after. Thereafter, Anna Raines contacted a few teachers, got emailed statements. Melanie Mundy, who was simply just another teacher at Tucker's who had not even had any prank pulled on her that day, contacted the alleged victim, asked her to write a written statement, which she then provided to Melanie Mundy, who provided it to Anna Raines, and provided it to Marianne Sparks. And from that written statement is where all of these charges that we've all read about in the newspaper for months stem from. As you'll recall, the major allegation in those charges was that Mr. Mock had illegally harassed or intimidated a teacher based upon her race under Board Policy 5.500. Ms. Sparks also testified at that hearing that if a teacher made an allegation of harassment against another teacher, she would investigate and work with the principal of the school. Well, as I said, no one ever spoke with Susie Breedwell about it, who was the principal of the school. But not only that, no one, not Ms. Sparks, Dr. Ryder, no one with the central office, I learned at the hearing, ever even spoke with the alleged victim until after the July 6th board meeting when those charges were presented to you and were voted on. So nobody even spoken with this woman about how she felt, if she felt targeted or bullied or harassed. It was simply hearsay 3 times removed on a piece of paper that all of those charges were based off of. Actually, I believe that the only time they did speak with her after that was when she eventually came up to the central office and asked to be transferred to another school because she had been reading some hurtful, very hurtful comments on social media, Facebook, which stemmed from the charges that were published in the paper and read in public at the school board meeting, which were attributed to her. And as she testified at the hearing, I never made any of those complaints. I've never once said or felt that I was afraid of Matthew Mock. I never felt harassed by him. I never felt intimidated by him. didn't file a complaint. I was asked to file a statement by Melanie Mundy, who, I mean, if you don't know, is now the assistant principal at Tucker's Crossroads. So Mundy, who was simply a coworker of his, complained on her behalf and was ultimately also asked to review the charges on behalf of the central office before they were presented to you guys on July 6th. Mundy and Anna Raines more or less conducted the entire investigation. So basically what you had was the very person who had filed a complaint on behalf of somebody else was also conducting the investigation. If you'll review, just to go over a few high points of the alleged victim's testimony from that hearing, she said that she provided that written statement at the request of Melanie Mundy on May 28th, which again never made sense to me because apparently it wasn't until June 1st that either of them were even instructed to get statements after Anna Raines had attended that principal's meeting. The only adjectives she used that day to describe her feelings from May 28th were irritated and aggravated. She said that she contacted Ms. Bridwell in the afternoon to show her the desk, just as simply she wanted her to know, I'm ready to go home, I didn't do this, I'm not cleaning this up. Ms. Bridwell said, that's fine. She said that she would not describe her room as trash, but that it was simply in disarray. She had never mentioned to anybody about race or feeling targeted based on her race. And that she actually only learned of her allegations of racial discrimination once she read them on social media and in the newspapers. This, again, ultimately led to, I guess, a couple days after that principal's meeting, June 3rd, Mr. Mock was contacted by someone at the central office around noon and asked if he could come in. He could come in around 3 o'clock that day for a meeting, but wasn't told what the purpose of the meeting was. This meeting was ultimately referred to in that hearing as his due process hearing. Although Mr. Mock testified that he didn't feel as though anything he said during this due process meeting was considered at all in the investigation, and that actually between the time he was called at noon and asked to come in and 3 o'clock when he did come in, he tried to check the school email and had already been locked out of the school email before the meeting even began. I believe Exhibit 1 to that hearing were the charges that were presented to the board on July 6th. And it contains 23 numbered statements. And for the record, number 3, number 5, number 10, number 14, number 16, number 18, number 19, number 21, and number 22 were found by the hearing officer to have not been proven during the hearing. On top of that, there were several instances in these charges where things were included which were simply not true, or they alluded to conduct in a vague sense but didn't necessarily attribute it to Mr. Mock, but they were included in these charges against Mr. Mock and presumably were part of the basis of why you as a board should vote to terminate him. One glaring one that came out to me in the hearing was number 5 of these charges says this video from this day shows Mr. Mock and the 2 other school employees in the hallway outside of this teacher's room for a large majority of the time between 12:40 and 3 o'clock, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes. Well, for one, I don't know if any, well, I guess you know if you reviewed the transcript, but Mr. Mock's room was right next to this alleged victim's room. And his 2 cohorts, and I guess you should say, her room was next to his and the other one's room was here. Their room was on this hallway. Aside from that, if you look at the video footage which the school board or the school system made an exhibit, and the hearing officer acknowledges himself, it shows that they are out in the hallway for about, I think it said 7 minutes. But what has been presented here and printed in the media was that for 2 hours and 20 minutes, they just lingered outside this woman's room tormenting her. I think you also will review the actual policy 5.500, which again was considered as part of these charges. The first page of it says that it's the intent of this policy to set forth guidelines for handling violations of the policy and to specify the related complaint handling procedure. As I said, one of those complaint handling procedures is that each school has a complaint manager. And on top of that, step 1 of this says that the school principal, the department supervisor, is the person responsible for receiving verbal or written reports of discrimination or harassment at step 1. Well, again, the person who received the complaint was an assistant principal at a completely different school by a teacher who nothing happened to. I still to this day don't know if she was just saying what she perceived to be a problem that day, but the alleged victim testified that she never told Monday, anyone in the central office, or anybody that she felt that way. The policy 5.500 also says that any third person with knowledge or belief of conduct, which in this instance would be Melanie Mundy, belief of conduct which may constitute discrimination or harassment shall report the alleged acts immediately to an appropriate school system official as designated by this policy. Which once again, I would adhere to you sending a text message to an assistant principal at a completely different school does not fall within the policy. And the other thing simply is that these allegations greatly affected not only Mr. Mock, who has been out of his job for, at this point, half a year, without his regular income for half a year, but these allegations have been printed in the newspapers, on social media, but so they've not only affected him, but they've greatly affected that alleged victim. She had to transfer schools, and one thing that jumped out to me also in this policy 5.500 is it says false accusations of discrimination or harassment can have a serious detrimental effect on innocent parties. Any person who knowingly and intentionally makes a false accusation of discrimination or harassment for any reason which would be contrary to the spirit and intent of this policy shall be subject to appropriate disciplinary action as stipulated in the board policies and state and federal law. I assure you, this has in fact had a detrimental effect on my client. I gathered from the testimony from the alleged victim that day, it's had a serious detrimental effect on her. I simply ask that the recommended discipline of one semester without pay be revised to a written reprimand, or at most 5 days without pay. Because to me, with what you now have in front of you in the form of the transcript as proof, to say, well, he needs to be suspended for a semester without pay is arbitrary. One thing that we got into in the hearing was a teacher, and again, I don't want to bring his name up because he's not here to defend himself, but there had been a teacher in the Wilson County school system 1 month prior to the incident at Tucker's who at 2 a.m. in the early morning hours of the Monday after Easter Sunday had been arrested for DUI. And Ms. Parks testified that she had seen the police report in that case, in which it said the police officer pulled this car over. The teacher had moved to the back seat and tried to convince the cop that he was not the one driving. They pulled him out, he did a sobriety test, he argued about it the whole time, he failed it. And I asked him what happened to the teacher in that case, and he was suspended for 5 days. And I tried to understand why. Like, how did you determine 5 days was an appropriate disciplinary action in that circumstance, but in this circumstance, jumping straight to number 4 of policy 5.600 was what needed to occur here. And answer I ever really got, which never made sense to me, was that he had not been proven guilty in court yet, his charges were reduced. Well, of course, he hadn't been proven guilty in court yet because he was disciplined that week. That week, it was put in his file, suspended without pay for 5 days. Well, anybody who has any understanding of the court system knows, you get a DUI tonight, you're not gonna go to court for at least a month. It's not gonna be adjudicated that week. So I can't really see that actually played a role in deciding that was an appropriate punishment in that case. But what I can't understand also, having looked at the facts of that case and this one, is how, well, let me also say that under policy 5.600 of the school board, on page 3, it lists 21 different things for which the Wilson County School System expects exemplary conduct. And these are examples of actions which would require disciplinary action. Number 4 on that list is use of alcohol or illegal drugs off duty, which reflects discredit upon the employees and or school system. Number 5 is the arrest or conviction for use of alcohol or illegal drugs. But again, this man received a 5-day suspension without pay. I'm not saying that his discipline was unfair. I'm just saying, put up next to this one, it's one outweighs the other by a large margin. I still to this day have no understanding of why. Nothing that Mr. Mock was accused of is even on this list. Well, with the exception of neglect of duty, which the hearing officer said was not proven. Insubordination, which the hearing officer found was not proven. And that's it. So, I said all that to simply request respectfully that you take the time to look through the transcript, the actual facts that were presented, and reconsider the punishment and make it actually fit the crime in this case. And also, I don't know, I wanted to say also, I don't know, did you provide them with a copy of the post-hearing briefs?
Yes, today.
Okay, I was just gonna tell you, if any of you have any questions for me over the course of the next, I know you have 10 working days to make a decision, but on the last page of that has my phone number, my email address. If you have any questions for me about anything in this case, please feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to speak to any of you, but I appreciate your time this evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here on the other side from the 3-day hearing that we held before the hearing officer, Rob Wheeler. Let me take issue with a few of the things Mr. Clemens said before I get into my prepared remarks, and that is, he started off by telling you about the things that Mr. Mock did as a teacher, the things that his children liked him and that type of thing. We submit to you, that's what he's supposed to do as a teacher. That's his job. What he's not supposed to do is be out in the hall putting lotion on people's door handles. He's not supposed to be going in uninvitedly into another teacher's room and setting up a desk, moving desk around, setting a desk on top of her desk, forcing her to lock her door, forcing her to turn off the lights. Those are the type of things that he's not supposed to be doing. Those are the type of things that the hearing was about. He said that if you look at the evidence, Mr. Mock was only in the hallway about 7 minutes. I believe if you look at the evidence, you'll see we had 58 exhibits presented that day, several of which are still pictures that were timed. And then we had the entire hallway monitoring the film, the camera recording that was viewed by the hearing officer. Let me keep in mind too that the hearing officer has the benefit of something you don't have, and that is he has the opportunity to hear the witnesses, look at their witnesses, test their demeanor, their character, that type of thing. So that, there ought to be some deference granted to the hearing officer for that. I would submit to you to look at what's in the record. And the other thing I would say to you is it's not unusual, and I see it, or used to see it when I was doing this type of work in the criminal area, and I'm not to imply that Mr. Mock's a criminal, I'm not saying that. But I got to use this for comparison purposes. When you've got some charges against you that you don't want to have to answer to, you start trying somebody else. And that's what Mr. Flemings has tried to do here tonight by some DUI charge that was out there. I remember it coming up that day, and I believe, and if I misquote this, if I say it incorrectly, number one, I'm sure he'll correct me. Number two, if I say it incorrectly and I find out, I'll correct it. But I believe this particular individual got a 5-day suspension very quickly after that because he did not report it in a timely manner as required by our policy. That was why his suspension was over, and then they were waiting on the result of the criminal charges. Now, I'm here today defending, frankly, a decision I don't totally agree with. I don't disagree with the decision that there was wrongdoing that took place at Tucker's Crossroads on May the 28th, and that Mr. Mock was responsible for it. What I do disagree with is the degree of punishment. Dr. Wright has the authority to suspend or terminate. She chose to recommend termination based upon all the information she had available to her from the investigation done by Ms. Mary Ann Sparks, your Human Resource Director. Ms. Sparks testified for almost a day, as I recall, in this 3-day hearing. She did most of the investigation. That is what her responsibility is, to look into these type of things. One of her responsibilities, let me say that, she has many. Dr. Wright felt the termination was justified based upon the information that was available at that time. You felt so too in a 5-0 vote. I will submit to you that even though I'm not defending the result of the punishment, if termination is justified, suspension certainly is, and that's what the hearing officer found, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The hearing officer found that there was conduct unbecoming to a member of the teaching profession. I think you will see in his order, if you haven't already seen it, he referred to it, frankly, as juvenile behavior. Mr. Clemens said they did not find insubordination. I beg to differ with you. They did find insubordination, but he said, but not to the extent that necessitates his dismissal. So in his mind, as I interpreted that order, there was insubordination, but not to the extent that would justify termination. The facts support both of these findings, and as I said before, the hearing officer had the benefit of observing these witnesses. Because of that, I would be very cautious in thinking about changing the decision of the hearing officer. It went through a 3-day hearing while you get to hear about a 20-minute summary of what the lawyers think happened. The lawyers, including myself, what we say is not testimony. Mr. Mock's defense was not that it didn't happen. His defense was it was a prank, and it happened apparently at Tucker's Crossroads on a fairly regular basis. I would submit to you that the hearing officer found that conduct was not acceptable. Mr. Mock tried to make it sound like his actions only affected him or the physical premises at Tucker's Crossroads. You'll recall, once at the end of the day, he says, I went back and cleaned up everything. Well, why should you have to clean up anything if you don't perform the act? And what I heard here today is that his defense is primarily based on Mrs. Bridwell's testimony. As you heard, Ms. Bridwell's last official day was June the 12th. She had already submitted her retirement. She was leaving. And apparently, based upon Mr. Mock's counsel's own comments, that these pranks were occurring out there, apparently they occurred under her watch. So maybe she was not going to investigate. But the actions that were taken there not only affected Mr. Mock, but they had a real effect on the school system. Let me give you several ways that it did. 2 non-tenured employees that were following Mr. Mock around that day and assisting him, being lookouts and handing him lotion and that type of thing, as you'll see from the pictures, did not get rehired. That conduct directly affected them. Something that Mr. Clemens did not share with you, but you probably saw in the testimony, is Mr. Mock had a master key out there to all the rooms at Tucker's Crossroads. There was testimony that previous pranks had been performed where he had gone into someone else's classroom and removed packing peanuts and put them in people's cars out in the parking lot. He was a threat to get into anybody's room, and at times did. There was a violation of the board policy 5.500. Harassment is prohibited. This was directed against a specific teacher. While the teacher that it was directed against was a minority, the statute is not written in, or the policy is not written in such a way that it has to be directed toward a minority or a protected class. But it definitely had an effect on her. You will see from the testimony that that afternoon, she was trying to get her work done because this was the last full day of work before the students got their report cards the next day. She had to turn out her lights, lock her door, close her blinds, and forced to act like she wasn't there in her own room. Then she had to relocate to another teacher's office to try to get away from this. She testified she was nervous. It was disruptive to her concentration. And then she said she was aggravated, uncomfortable, and again said disruptive. Subsequently that, based upon all this stuff on Facebook, and let me just say to you, nothing on Facebook, and Mr. Clemens has mentioned several times about media reports, nothing in the media, that's not evidence. She asked to be transferred to another school, and that transfer was granted. So that affected her. It affected Tucker's Crossroads, because now they lost what, from all evidence, was a good teacher to another school in this county. Her students lost her. And it affected the school system in that when you have to transfer someone someplace, you've got to replace them with somebody else. The hearing officer correctly noted in his decision that the Board of Education, excuse me, not the board, but the HR and Dr. Wright had a duty to investigate this. If it's brought to their attention, and all of this smokescreen about who brought it to their attention, nobody has denied the facts that it happened. And when it got to the central office, it was investigated and dealt with in the way that the policy is supposed to work. Let me ask you this. What if every teacher in the system had done this on May the 28th? If they just decided they'd get out and lotion up doorknobs and put stuff in people's cars? This was a work day. This wasn't a play day. This wasn't recess for teachers. It was a work day. And they had to complete that day for the students to get their report cards the next day. What if everybody had done this? What message does this send to the teachers who are doing right if someone can do this and say, it's no big deal, it's a prank, don't worry about it? What about the folks that are out there doing right? The folks at Tucker's Crossroads, the folks in every school we had in the county that day doing what they were supposed to be doing? The hearing officer found that this conduct violated the teacher's code of ethics. Your action and the action of the hearing officer supports the efforts of teachers to do what's right. Teachers rightly proclaim themselves as professionals. They have a right to be treated as professionals, but they have a duty to act as professionals. What is the professional action in lotioning up door handles, making another teacher nervous and uncomfortable in her own classroom, and that type of thing? There was Mr. Mock's action was a disregard for the direction of Kim Clemens and the technology coaches. You'll see in there from Ms. Clemens' testimony, she's the instructional technology supervisor. We've in the school system, beginning the Google Classroom. Every teacher in the system on May the 28th the objective for that day, Ms. Clemens testified, was to log into the Google Classroom so that the technology coaches and Ms. Clemens could verify that they knew how to access the system so that they could do the rest of their stuff over the summer. Mr. Mock did not do that. Now, he did it the next morning at 8:20 on the 29th. Something very interesting to me, very interesting and very telling about the teacher who was harassed. She got hers done at 1:43 that day, during the very time that she was being bothered. She was still doing her job while somebody else was out not doing it. And this stuff that I got everything done that day I was supposed to, no sir, they did not get that part done. And it was supposed to be done that day. What if everybody else had not done it that day? What if they just said, I ain't doing mine either? Where would we have been? This was a specific task assigned to our teachers, and it sounds like over 99% of our people did that. Not Mr. Moore. Moreover, what kind of message does this send to our students? If our students get caught in pranks where they do damage to our school classrooms or our schools or other things owned and paid for by the taxpayers, they violate rules or policies, they get punished. Sometimes they get suspended. Sometimes they get expelled. Unfortunately, we have to have an alternative school for them. But if an adult does it and there's no consequences, what type of message are we sending to our students? You'll recall, and it may not have been, I don't think it's been under this current board's membership, but in the past we've had students perform pranks. Pranks now, that's what they were called. That resulted in them not being able to walk the graduation line. What kind of message are we sending to those folks if we say this is okay, just disregard? Mr. Mock wants you to give him a break. That's what he's asking for. I will submit to you that the hearing officer gave him a break when he suspended him for a semester and didn't terminate him. At page 15 of the hearing officer's decision, he said as follows: as stated, while this behavior was juvenile at best, I do not believe, based on this record, that it justifies Mr. Mock's dismissal. However, the keys to his career are in his hands. If there is further evidence of conduct unbecoming a member of the teaching profession in the form of joke playing that gets out of hand, then based on this history, it should result in his dismissal as a tenured teacher, thereby resulting in the loss of his teacher's license. Again, I'm using a criminal comparison, and I am not saying Mr. Mock is a criminal. Please do not understand me to say that. But what Mr. Mock got from the hearing officer was a break that gave him a reduced punishment and put him on probation. Basically, the hearing officer said, don't do anything like this again. And then the hearing officer went on to say this decision is not to be construed to tell the school administration where Mr. Mock should teach. But Mr. Mock has an opportunity on January 4th to come back and teach in this system. He's given a second chance. He doesn't deserve any more breaks than what the hearing officer's already given. I heard Mr. Clemens offer that if you wanted to call him and ask him any questions about these documents, you could do so. I certainly have no problem with Mr. Clemens' conduct, I'll tell you up front. But I don't know whether you're supposed to make your decision on anything other than what's in the record. As I said, what we've had an opportunity tonight to do is argue, but it's not evidence. So I'm not sure that that would be proper. I'll leave that up to you. I think that everything that you have that should be considered is before you. And these two things, unfortunately, were not in there. I frankly did not think they were part of the record, but Michael Clemens thinks they are, and I have no problem in submitting them to him. But that's the reason you got to them today. So you may want some time to review those or whatever, but I don't know that we ought to discuss this outside the context of this meeting. So that's all I have to say. I would ask you to uphold the hearing officer's decision. Thank you.
Just a few things. First, in my bringing up the other teacher with the DUI charges. I'm not by any means trying to credit diversion or throw that guy under the bus. Like I said, I'm simply trying to figure out the logic and rationale between how you decide what's punishment for one person and what's the punishment for another, and what, because there has to be a system, otherwise it's arbitrary, which is against the Tenure Act. I'm just trying to figure that out. And also, I do not take issue, I don't think anybody can, that with the fact that, yes, some of, or if not all of these pranks, that they were childish. And I'm not saying that he didn't do them. But again, it was the last day of school. It was hand lotion on doorknobs, so people are touching their hands and getting hand lotion, and desks being moved around. So he kept saying, what kind of message does this send our kids? Well, what kind of message does it send our kids? Like, you never play pranks, never laugh, go to school, put your head down. Maybe if there's a teacher at the school you don't like, go tell another teacher, just pick a minority teacher out of that school and be like, they were targeting that person. You could get promoted to assistant principal at that school. I mean, if you just look at the transcript, it is full of contradictions, baseless allegations, and in many instances, lies. So I would beg of you, if you haven't had the chance to do so before tonight, to thoroughly look through that transcript. And I understand what Mr. Jennings was saying about not contacting me after this to ask any questions. My basis in that was simply, I know that when you guys have questions, you go to Mr. Jennings. Let me rephrase this. If after this hearing you've got questions for either of us, I would ask that you send both of us an email, copy both of us and ask us anything you got. But I'm also more than happy to answer any questions you have right now, if any of you have any. But otherwise, I would simply, again, request that, Mr. Mock isn't asking for a break. He's simply asking that the tenure law, the board's own policies, be followed. And that's it. Thanks. Any questions, anybody?
Mike, you had sent us an email about there were certain things that we could do, a time frame, we could vote on it tonight, we could take, would you mind going over those things again, or else I don't have that here in front of me?
I didn't bring mine either. I'll do my best to speak to that. First of all, the time frame, and Michael, am I saying that you disagree with? Jump in here.
Here it is, this is what you
Okay.
sent to us, Dr. Wright had it there. You might want to share
I
that.
brought in, actually, I said I didn't bring it in. I may have, but I got a whole box full of stuff over there. I didn't really thought of trying to find it. First of all, on the time frame, you have 10 business days to make this decision. I know that the Board of Education central offices are closed this week, but I think a reasonable interpretation of that, and I think I mentioned this and hopefully I copied Michael from it, is that Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, and New Year's Day not be counted, and weekends are not counted. So I think when you count everything else as a business day in there, the 10th day would be January the 7th, which puts you after your next board meeting. You can deliberate tonight and make a decision. You can deliberate at that meeting and make a decision, but I think you have to deliberate and make a decision by January the 7th. You okay with that? You've got 4 options, one of which I'll expand upon a little more because Michael called my attention to something. You have 4 options, and in no particular order, I'm telling you what they are in the statute, okay? Sustain the decision of the hearing officer. Send the record back, this is number 2, send the record back if you believe additional evidence is necessary. The statute doesn't really expound on that too much, but I assume this means that if there's something you want more proof on or whatever, you would send it back and say, we want to hear more about this issue or these two issues or whatever. And then that would have to go back to the hearing officer. The third one is revise the penalty. I said, I guess I got to be too much of a representative here. It would imply that you can impose a harsher penalty. Michael Clemens sent me an email saying that you could also impose a lighter penalty, and that's correct. I should have put that in there. And then number 4, reverse the decision. It takes 3 of you voting in the same way to make a decision. I will tell you that, and Teresa may kill me for this, this has been taken down by a court reporter. I suppose you could get a copy of what is said tonight, but it kind of flies in the face of what I said, of what Mr. Clemens and I say is not testimony. So I hope I've covered that, what you asked, Mr. Chairman.
I think so. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the board, you have heard the testimony from both Mr. Mock's legal counsel and the legal counsel for the Board of Education. You've also heard from the counsel for the Board of Education that we have some options here. So at this time, the chair would entertain what you might want to do. You want to put this off for 10 days? You want to make a decision tonight? Do you want, and what we need to do, but to stand by the recommendations from the hearing officer? What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we would take this matter up on January 4th to allow us to, I have not had a chance to read these closing documents. I was tied up this afternoon, didn't even see them until I got ready to leave to come to the meeting. So my motion would be that we take this action on January 4th at the board meeting as part of our active agenda and make a decision at that point.
You put that in form of a motion?
Yes, sir.
Motion made by Mr. Withers that we postpone this until our January the 4th regular meeting. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. McNeese. Discussion.
I do have a lot of questions, discussions, questions that I don't know really where to go with this, honestly. Going back to a couple of things that Mr. Jennings said. He did bring up the 5-0 vote last time. At the time of the 5-0 vote, there was an issue of racial discrimination that was thrown out to us. That throws a lot of weight into what I think I would have voted differently, maybe, if that had not been a part of that. Now that racial discrimination is really not part of that, if I'd known that at the time, I would not have voted to do that, knowing everything that I do know now. Mike mentioned damage to our school. What damage? Physical damage to the school. What physical damage was done to the school? What vandalism occurred?
You asking?
Anybody that wants to answer?
Well, the proof was there that the motion was placed on that.
Did it do damage to the school? My definition of vandalism, if I tear something up and break it,
There's testimony in the
was it
record.
stupid that,
I was gonna say there's testimony in the record that nothing needed to be repaired, nothing needed.
I'm not even suggesting that he did, what he did was not, I don't like the word stupid, but I'll use that in this case. It's very dumb to do those things. But I'm not at the point where, there again, it goes back to racial discrimination. That didn't happen. Who investigated this?
It was under the direction of Marianne Sparks, your HR director.
It was under her direction, but who investigated it?
Again, I would say under the direction of Marianne Sparks.
Miss Mundy and Miss Raines investigated it. They were on the site, they were doing all that, those stuff that was there.
Okay.
Nobody, it bothers me that the one thing that was the biggest topic that we had was racial discrimination. Nobody talked to Ms. Powell about that till sometime in July. Why wouldn't you go to the person that those charges were brought up about? Why didn't we go to her and ask her these things? Can anybody answer me that? Who done the investigation? Can anybody answer me that question? Why didn't we go to Ms. Powell to find those answers out? Because she wasn't discriminated. She didn't feel like she was discriminated against. Will we agree with that?
I'm not going to agree with anything, Wayne, because what you're supposed to make a decision on is what's based in the record, and not anything certainly that the attorneys say.
And Mike, honestly, I think the example that you used, what if all teachers done that on May 28th? That, to me, that's so ridiculous, to even think that. I mean, why, those things would never happen like that. I don't know why something like that was brought up. And I'll say this, it seems like I'm on this side, and I'm certainly not. Number one, nobody ever suggested that he didn't deserve a punishment. And you kept saying that. What would it prove to the students? Nobody's saying he didn't deserve a punishment. I never heard that. And to imply to me that Mr. Mock made these teachers do that, they were willing participants. One teacher even put lotion on the inside of a door. Mr. Mock didn't make these teachers do that. They done their own on their own. So he can't be blamed for them doing other things. It was very dumb to do. I call it sophomoric or whatever. I just don't understand. We jumped from A or 1 to 4 in those penalty codes. I don't understand why we did that. When all we did, we didn't do any damage to the building. We didn't vandalize it. To me, we jumped way ahead, and 2 people that wasn't even involved in that school as administration conducted the most of the interviews or the investigation. Had one other thing and I just forgot it. And I don't think anybody also suggested that the other teacher out there, you mentioned that it was all a subterfuge to draw attention away from what I did there. We're not consistent in our policy. I know of a teacher, a principal that was demoted from a school and sent out to Never Never Land, and they never talked to him until the paperwork was drafted and was ready to hand to him. They never talked to that gentleman, and he was demoted. We're not consistent in our punishment here. And I'll hush. And I'll answer any questions anybody might have for me, except the press.
I have a motion on the floor and a second that we postpone this until the January the 4th board meeting. All in favor of vote to postpone it, vote aye.
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 Opposed? I think we need to call for a roll call vote. Yeah, okay. Let's show passing answer. We will pass this off until January. That's, if you said aye, I mean, I didn't hear you say anything. Okay. All right. Next order of business.
Yes, sir, I have another matter to discuss with you. With regard to the Catherine Bean matter that was Court of Appeals decision that upheld the Chancery Court, I think I sent you an email back a little bit, maybe the first part of December. We have 60 days to file, to seek an permission to appeal to the Supreme Court. That is by permission, it's not by right. So 60 days as I calculate it, and it has to be calculated correctly, or day 61, you're out. Has to be filed on December 28th, that's next Monday. Yeah,
Can you refresh my brain about this one?
don't ask me too much now.
I don't.
Okay. This is the one on Wayne at Wilson Central where we granted the out-of-zone request. Previous administration granted the out-of-zone request to a young lady, and I don't need to use the name, although it's a public record now, but from Mount Juliet to Wilson Central. When we received some information a day or two before school started that it was not an out-of-zone request, they were in fact living in another county, changing the rules. And we went back, and the day before, 2 days before classes were to start, we gave them notice that they could not enroll in our school system. Rather than bring it to the Board of Education, which ironically was meeting Monday night, day one of the school term, they ran into Chancery Court on Friday afternoon without giving me notice. They know I've been representing y'all 26 years. They ran in there and and got a temporary injunction to allow them to go to school. And so we challenged that because it violates our policy, and we lost in the Chancery Court. We took it up to the Court of Appeals, and they upheld the decision.
I thought that was the one I was just unsure for that.
Yeah, that's it. And if we go up on seeking permission to appeal, 2 out of the 5 justices have to agree to grant it. As I said in my comments to you in an email, I have some questions about whether or not this can be granted, but I also have to tell you that if you don't seek the application within 60 days, you've lost your right. And there is another case with similar facts, maybe not identical facts, working through the system over in Montgomery County in Chancery Court. And I think it went to trial a couple of weeks ago. I have not heard the outcome of that. So that is the case over there, if you'll recall, where the young man played football in 7 games, and then they found out that he was not living in the zone, and they self-reported to TWSAA and forfeited 7 games, cost them a chance to go to the playoffs. I think they went from 8-1 to 1-7, or that doesn't matter quite, or maybe it does, I don't know. But turned that season around, and they are, that case was being tried earlier this month, but I don't know the result.
Is that something, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry, they have 2 additional cases besides that one.
Did it? All right.
There's 3.
is this something, Mr. Jennings, that we can, if we were to decide to apply for the appeal, and then the Montgomery case turned out to where we didn't want to go any further, that we could withdraw it at a later date?
You could, and frankly, Mr. Weathers, what will happen is if I file my application, they've got 15, the other side has 15 days from that to respond to it, and then the court will make their decision. So I wouldn't anticipate anything coming back from them until late January, early February.
So we should at least be able to hear something back on the other case in that timeframe.
Would we be in this if we didn't allow the transfer originally?
I'm sorry, man, I didn't hear.
We assumed they lived in Mount Juliet, and so we granted that.
We did.
If we had not have granted that originally, would we be in the same position? Because I'm worried about just wholesale changes from this county to another county.
Well, you know, that issue never really came up, and I thought it might, both at the trial court and the Court of Appeals, and it didn't. My concern, very frankly, is that decisions of who is eligible to attend school in Wilson County are to be made through our attendance officer and through here, an appeal to here. If we're going to start letting people run into court and getting those orders, it's kind of going behind the Board of Education.
Circumvents our authority.
It does.
And the recruiting board's wrong type of thing to me, too.
It certainly opens the door.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we would file the appeal, and then we can make a decision at a later date as to whether we want to continue the appeal process or not. But I think in order to uphold our policies, I would move that we would file that appeal with the state Supreme Court.
I agree.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Withers, second by Mr. Robinson, that we appeal this decision and take it on to a higher court. Any further discussion? Being no further discussion, I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor of carrying on the appeal, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let it show that pass unanimously. No other business to come before the Wilson County Board of
Can
Education?
we bring any other business up?
Not unless it was stated in the policy. This is a special call meeting, so you listed what you're.
So I can't ask for, I'm gonna go back on the one bid per thing, and it's not the one tonight, but deal with architects, but, okay.
Okay.
If I can't bring architects up, then I won't.
Motion to adjourn?
I took that like